Well, welcome back to another episode of the Financially Free Journey podcast, and I'm your host, Courtney Dyer. And you know, if you've been here for a while, if you're an OG listener, this podcast aims to dispel the seemingly complex topic of personal finances, money management, debt, savings, investing, and all things retirement. And today, I had the opportunity of bringing on one of my favorite guests so far, Kristina Ellis. And I had such a great time talking to her, as you'll be able to see. Well, not really see, as you'll be able to hear when you listen to this episode. We were vibing. We were having a great time. I actually had the opportunity to meet Kristina in person, and we were debating. I think it was in 2021. So it was maybe around a year ago. I went out to Tennessee and I was invited to the Ramsey influencer event, and Kristina had just joined the Ramsey team as one of their personalities. And we had such a good time connecting, and it was such a great environment. And this was a really quick turnaround. If you think about it, it's like less than a year. That's a quick turnaround to be able to connect like you said you're going to. So we had such a good time. So Kristina let me just share this with you. She is a renowned, successful author of multiple books, okay? She went to college herself, and she had earned over $500,000 in scholarships. Like, you heard that correctly, $500,000 in scholarship funds. So when she says you can absolutely go to college debt-free, she means it. I mean, she is an advocate, and she has dedicated herself to being able to teach others how to do exactly what she did. She was also in the Borrowed Future documentary that recently came out, and she just shared so many tips and tricks on this episode, guys. It's unbelievable. I'm going to attempt to put a lot of it in the show notes, but I don't know if the show notes is large enough for me to be able to include everything. So make sure that you save this episode. If you're listening to this while you're driving, or you're multitasking like most people, make sure you save it so you can go back and you can listen to these tips and you can pull it up and do the things that Kristina is talking about. And before you say, well, I already went to college, this is something I'm going to skip, I'm going to go to my next favorite podcast. Hold on, because you know someone young in your life. You have either children yourselves, you have nieces, nephews, cousins, you have friends who have kids. You know someone who is going to be going to college, or at least considering the option of going to college, right? And we want to be able to help change this dynamic and this culture that we have around student loan debt, because right now we are in over $1 trillion of student loan debt as a country. And this is an epidemic. It's a crisis. And lots of people are unable to manage their student loan payments. And when you take out those loans early on in life, when you're 17, 18 years old, it seems, as Kristina says in the episode, so far off in the distant future, it's not that big of a deal, right? And you think you're going to be making millions of dollars, which I hope everyone does. Like, let's manifest that. But we have to consider the fact that these kids need our voice. They need our direction to be able to go to college and to be able to do it without taking on a ton of debt. So listen to this episode, because you can help someone in your life. And not only just kids. What about adults going back to college, right? Or wanting to start that second career? This is for them as well. So before you tune it out, make sure that you listen to this and all of the amazing tips that Kristina shares. So without further ado, here's my interview with Kristina Ellis.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Oh, I'm living the dream, quite honestly. It's like my default answer. People are like, are you really living the dream? I'm like, I'm living the mediocre, like normal life, but I want to say the dream. You know what I mean? So
yeah, you're like, this sounds optimistic.
It does. It throws it's like manifesting the dream. That's what I think. I'm just live, laugh, loving. I think that's going to be my new like default, so a Hobby Lobby sign.
Oh my gosh. That's so funny. I have always loved the live, laugh, love thing. And then I recently read that like Gen Z has a whole thing with it. I'm like,
they're saying that we're chuggy for it as millennials. And then I had to proceed to Google chuggy and be like, am I chuggy? Like, yes, I am. You know what I mean? And I own it. This is the thing, is this has been a long time coming, because we met, was it literally like a year ago, or was it maybe even longer when I came to Tennessee?
2021.
I hope so. I hope it
Yeah.
wasn't 2020. Okay. So it
No,
hasn't.
it's like 8 months or so because it was right when I started Ramsey. So I've been here almost 8 months, I think.
So
Yeah.
really in like adult time, this is like an immediate follow-up if you think about it. Right? But
Yeah.
it's because I'm like, we met not that long ago on an adult
Right.
timeline and hung out in Tennessee at the Ramsey Influencer event. And that was amazing. I think had you just had a baby at that time? Because I know I just had mine.
Yep.
And I think we were vibing on like the like motherhood journey, right, at the event.
Yes.
So that was
Yes.
so fun. Yeah,
Oh.
guys, Kristina's vibes are immaculate. And so I'm just saying, if you don't already know her, she is absolutely amazing. And this is why today, obviously, I mean, amongst all of your, amazing things that you can share, I want to talk about $500,000 in scholarship funds. I mean, $500,000. When I say that, it sounds not real. It sounds like I'm exaggerating and being chooky, but I mean it. It's $500,000 in scholarship funds. So I want to talk about your journey. Like, how did you get to that point when you were getting ready to go to college to like start this scholarship journey? Like, can you walk us through that?
Yeah. So my freshman year of high school, my mom, she basically sat me down and said, Kristina, I love you and I believe in you, but there's just no way that I can support you financially once you graduate from high school. So you're on your own for college.
Ooh.
And at first I was like, oh, why are you telling me this? I'm a freshman in high school. What can I do about it? And I kind of started getting frustrated, but at the same time, I knew that she was right. When I was 7 years old, my dad, he passed away after a long and painful battle with brain cancer. And my mom, she's an immigrant from Venezuela. And, she didn't speak super strong English. She's not from, where we lived in Indiana. And so it was just a lot for her to process. And she was doing the best she could, but she couldn't afford to send me and my brother to college and spend thousands and thousands of dollars a year to put us through school. But at the same time, she was super driven and was like, I worked so hard in my life and have gotten this far. I definitely expect y'all to go on and get an education and move forward and do great things. So she really challenged me because she was like, you don't have to struggle with money your whole life. And if you work hard enough now, I know that you can go to college and start fresh and just build a life, have things that I never got to have. And so I started getting really motivated. She told me about scholarships and was like, if you do your research now, if you build a resume throughout high school, you can get these things called scholarships. And I didn't really know what they were at the time. I wasn't super familiar with them, but I started reading books and interviewing alumni from my high school who'd won scholarships and just trying to figure out what I could do to stand out in the process. And I put in the work throughout high school. I did a ton of volunteer work. I did a lot of clubs and sports and took up leadership roles. And then my senior year of high school, I just treated the scholarship application process like a part-time job. I applied and I applied and applied. And thankfully, it led me to win over $500,000 in scholarships.
Oh my gosh.
So thankful.
That's
thankful.
like a full-time job, right? I mean, how many
Yeah.
how many applications do you think you submitted if you had to just ballpark it?
Yeah. So I treated it like a part-time job and I actually did about 50 applications, which now in hindsight, especially with how competitive it is now, I recommend students apply for like hundreds of scholarships. But I did about 50 applications and had pretty good odds, ended up winning 20 of them, around 20 of them. And actually won some really big ones, thankfully. So it just added up quickly. Thank God.
One of the things that like stood out to me is that your mom had this conversation with you early on, and it seems like that's such an anomaly, right? Like your situation is not the societal norm. Most of the times it's like, hey, you're a senior in high school or maybe a junior. Like if you're getting ahead of the curve, it's like, you got to start thinking about this. And it doesn't give you a lot of prep time. Right. And it's just no fault to anybody, but that's typically what you see or what people have experienced. And so that definitely is a leg up in this situation.
Yeah, that's part of the challenge. And I encourage parents to talk to their students early. A lot of people feel uncomfortable talking about money, especially if they don't have the money to pay for their students' education. But it's like not having that conversation is just, it makes it harder because then the first people to really talk to them about money, it's people who are offering them student loans and they don't really know any better and they're kind of shocked and caught off guard and they've already got this vision for where they want to go to school. And they're like, well, then I have to take out student loans. And it's like, no, you don't. But it's really up to parents to have those conversations early and just be really real about finances, even if it's hard, even if it's uncomfortable. like that's really how you help set your student up for success.
It's so interesting to me. It's like sex, money, and politics are off the table, even with your closest friends and family members, right? Including your parents. It's like, it's not your business how much money we have or how much we make. And it's things, it's like, we need to talk about this and make it where it's not taboo, because that's how people are able to learn, whether it's from our mistakes as parents or from things that we've had as a success in our past. So I love that it's like, let's open up the table and let's have it be an open and honest conversation. I was thinking, when I was thinking about our conversation today, I'm like, I can't wait to share this with Kristina. So when I was graduating high school, like my friend pack, all of them were going to like UC Davis, Berkeley, Stanford, like these super expensive, like UNR, very expensive colleges when you look up the tuition. And I was like, well, mom, do we have the money for me to apply to Santa Barbara? You know, and you think about cost of living outside of tuition. And it's like, no, like that's too expensive, you know? And I just think now statistically, the amount of people, and maybe the people I went to high school with, like how much debt did they carry over? You know, do you know like roundabout the statistics around the debt right now when it comes to college, like tuition and all that?
Yeah, there's like $1.6 trillion in student
Oh,
loan debt right now. It's crazy. Like
I
the
mean,
stats are
I'm tingling.
crazy.
It's
Yeah, next to
too
mortgages, it's like
much.
the biggest consumer debt.
Oh
Like
my
it is
gosh.
a toxic industry and a huge, huge problem.
Well,
We
and they
actually
make it
did,
so easy to sign over your life, right? I mean,
yep,
you can't get a mortgage or a car or even like a store credit card, but you can get like $100,000 in student loan debt.
at 18 years old.
Right.
Like
You don't even know what it
literally
is.
18 years old.
You're like,
That's
what's the difference between a debit and a credit card? I don't know, but yeah, let me sign this.
yeah. Yeah, like you couldn't get a loan to start a business or something. But yes,
No.
like you can get you know, $50,000 a year, like Dave says, to study left-handed puppetry. Like it's like you can get it to study these jobs that it's not even really like considering ROI and if that's going to pay off and you're going to be able to pay off that debt. Like it's
Right.
just like they're handing it out because they're saying all education is good and it's all going to pay off. And it's like, wait, we need to really have conversations about this and really talk to students about money and all of this stuff before they sign on the dotted line because it's so much
Absolutely.
harder to pay off than they make it sound. They make
Oh,
it sound
yeah.
like it's just so easy, like everybody's doing it. Like it's just assumed it's a rite of passage. And it's like, no, it really shouldn't be that way. Like at 18 years old, that's
Oh,
crazy.
yeah. Yeah, you're a baby, right? Like you don't know anything yet. Here you are entrapping yourself for essentially life for a lot of people. And like you said, they make it seem so much easier to pay off than it actually is in reality. And so being able to educate these, not only the youth of America, but also the parents, like we were just talking about, like how can you prepare your children, whether they're 5 years old right now or they're teenagers, what can you do? What active steps? So I think this conversation has to be had like more loudly so everybody can be a part of this.
Absolutely. Yeah. We did a documentary here at Ramsey called Borrowed Future, and it's basically exposing the toxic student loan industry. It's showing how it's kind of like set up to work against you, but how you can actually have the power to beat the system and take control of your own education and get it debt free. So I always encourage parents to show it to students. I encourage people who have a bunch of student loans to show it to students because one of the best things people can do right now is be advocates for the younger generation. You know, that's so much of my work right now is going like, I've seen the pain that student loans have caused people in the long run. Like I have several friends that are now buried in student loan debt. They feel like they can't buy houses, they can't start families, they're scared to get married because they have this like heavy burden of student loan debt. And they keep saying like, nobody told me this when I was 18 years old. Like nobody stopped me. Like how did an adult not stop me from
Yeah.
taking this out? And so I just think it's so important. Like, if you feel that frustration, if you have student loans, if you're a parent with kids, like, be willing to have that conversation. Be willing to say, hey, wait, like, this isn't as easy as it sounds. Let me explain how this really works and show them the documentary, show them the people in the documentary who were told that lie that it's just going to be easy to pay off. And the documentary shows their struggles. There's a teacher that's working like 12 hours a day and giving blood and trying to do all these different things to pay off his student loan debt. And he feels so ashamed and heavy and burdened. And it's like, wow, to see his face and to see the pain it's caused in his life is just crazy. And there's also a orthodontist that has $1 million in student.
Oh, like it was my favorite documentary. I have to say, I think it was Amazon is where I saw it. Right? Is that where it's available?
Yep, it's on Prime
And
Video.
now it's like every single person I know, I'm like, please go watch Borrowed Future. And when AO is sitting around the table and having that conversation with the kids that were trying to determine where they were going to go to school, and that conversation around like, what school can you afford? And, there were some kids that were like, oh, I'm going to go to NYU, even though it's like, you're going to be in $250,000 worth of debt by the time you're done. And the mindset that you and I were just talking about earlier was, well, it's good debt, right? Quote unquote, it's good debt and it's going to pay off. And it's like, we see statistically that that's not necessarily the case. College is fantastic. We're not against college by any means, but it doesn't directly correlate to higher earning potentials necessarily, And so it's just, to see that thought process was already bred in so deeply into these teenagers. I mean, that was like, it was so astonishing for me.
Yeah. And to see like in one conversation how they went from like, oh yeah, $70,000, I'll just take out student loans to pay for it. And then AO having that conversation and bringing truth to it and bringing reality to the conversation around student loans. And by the end, it was like, oh, wait a minute. And they're thinking differently. And at the end of the documentary, it shares what their plans ended up being after that conversation. And it's like, wow, that shows the power of a conversation, that an adult had a conversation with them and challenged their mindset and opened them up to the fact that they can graduate debt free and go a different route. I just think that's so powerful. And it's evidence of why we as adults, we as people who, been through college, who are now, potentially have student loans or figured out how to graduate debt free, that we have these conversations, because it's like you could be that person that could save a student years of pain down the road. And it's just
absolutely
powerful spot to be in.
Well, and I loved you I just have to say, like seeing your beautiful face in the documentary as well. I'm like, I'm watching her on Amazon, video right now. So you're a superstar. I just want to throw that out there to the audience that they all understand, like, it's amazing. Go watch it. You'll see your girl in the documentary, and she shares a lot of her tips and tricks that we're going to be talking about today too. But that leads me to my next question, because a lot of people, right, especially right now in this stagflation, like hyperinflation environment that we're in, and a lot of people are like, I can't even afford to buy groceries. Like, I'm having to decide whether I can like pay rent or get gas. I mean, it's a pretty hard time for a lot of people financially. And so this thought around how can we alleviate some of that by, not necessarily adding more burden and more debt, but going through this scholarship process. Let's talk about how the rubber meets the road, because a lot of people are going to say, okay, that's great in theory, guys, but how do I do it? If I knew how to do it, I would do it. Right. So can we talk through some steps?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think one of the biggest things is keeping your mind open. So especially with college, I feel like people just get in this mindset that they have to go to the coolest school, or they have to go to where their friends are going, or where their parents went. Like you said, a lot of your friends were going to these like UC schools that were expensive, and you're like, whoa, this is out of my budget. But a lot of people are like, I got to do what it takes to make this happen. And It's like, we have to normalize that you don't have to go to a ranked school or an Ivy League school. Like, you can go if you can afford it, and that can be great. There are great experiences. But I often say, like, here at Ramsey, there's over 1,000 people who work here, and you walk around the office and there are people who went to community college first and then transferred to a 4-year school and managed to go debt free. And then there's people who went to Ivy Leagues and really prestigious schools. And a lot of times they're sitting right beside each other working the same job. Yep. And it's like, it wasn't the name on their degree that got them the job. It was their hustle and their willingness to just fight and work hard and build their resume and network and get to where they wanted to go in their career. And it's like, how sad would it be if somebody was $100,000 in debt because they went to that fancy school sitting next to somebody who went debt free? And it's like, they didn't have to go into that amount of debt to get the job and to get to where they wanted to go. So keep your mind open about your school choice. So consider going to community college first. A lot of states offer free programs for 2 years, so you can get your general ed credits out of the way and then transfer to a 4-year school. Maybe you go to a public school that's cheaper. Maybe you get in-state tuition versus going to that out-of-state really cool school with the football team. Like, keep your mind open and kind of try to lessen that pressure of going to the prestigious school, and go to what's right for you and what's right for your budget. So that's kind of like the first thing, is just keeping your mind open to that. And then, of course, Yeah, I love scholarships, apply for scholarships. That was my journey, winning over $500,000, being willing to put yourself out there and be strategic with that process. A lot of people apply to like 7 scholarships and they're like, oh, I'm frustrated. I didn't win any scholarships. But it's like, you got to apply. It's kind of a numbers game. We were
Yes.
meeting with this company recently that runs a database, and they said, I think the odds were like for every 30 scholarships you apply for, you win one. So it's like, be willing to put yourself out there. And that may sound like a lot of time and effort, but the thing with the scholarship application process is it gets easier as you go along. So it's like there's essays. Let's say you do like 5 essays initially to apply to, for, a few scholarships, but it's like once you have those 5 core essays, a lot of times the scholarship applications are asking similar questions. So you can recycle those essays for different applications. You can kind of just tweak and modify them and use them for a ton of scholarships. So it's like the process gets easier, and it's, you may apply for 30 scholarships, but if it leads to $10,000, and you spent 30 hours doing it, it's like, that's still amazing odds. Like your hourly
Yeah.
rate is awesome. So it's like, yes, it sounds like a lot of work, but when you total up the amount of money you can get in the long run, it's worth the time and effort.
Oh yeah, and it's not comparing apples to apples when you say, well, but if I just took out 10,000 in student loan debt, it really wouldn't be that much. When you calculate in your interest payments over time, putting in the time and the effort upfront to pay cash for your tuition versus financing it through student loans is a world of difference.
It's a world of difference. Exactly. And it's like, that is real money that's going to be coming out of your paycheck down the road. It's going to be impacting your income. Like this is, I think student loans a lot of times feel like so far down the road. It's like, oh my gosh, it's all just going to work out. It's going to be easy. But it's like, no, like you're really going to be paying that back someday, and it's going to be coming out of your income. And it's like scholarships on the front end. Yeah, they're a bit of work, but it's like a lot of people are like, look at small scholarships and they're like, oh, that's only $1,000. And it's like, yeah, but if you calculate out your time, if you spent 2 hours filling out that application and it allowed you to win $1,000, that's like making $500 an hour. Like, where else are you going to make that kind of money in high school? And then even as an adult, that's a lot of money per
Yeah.
hour.
I know, you're like expensive attorneys. It's like their hourly retainer. I mean, you're making good money at that point, people. So
Yeah.
that is worth your time. I mean, so here's my follow-up question. Do I just Google like scholarships? I mean, where do students find these things?
Yeah, so it's interesting because like you think that would be the easiest part in the process is just like finding scholarships, but I kind of feel like that's one of the hardest parts in the process because there are millions of scholarships given away every year, but to find those really high quality scholarships takes time. So I recommend students use scholarship databases. There are databases like Scholarship Owl, Scholly, CapX, Unigo. So these are basically databases where you input your information, like your grade, what you want to study, what kind of activities you've been involved in, and they filter you through scholarships and match you with scholarships that fit you. At least that's
Ooh.
the idea behind it. So you can usually get some pretty targeted results, but it's still up to you to kind of comb through that list and, evaluate each scholarship and say, like, is this worth my time and effort to apply to? It's tricky nowadays because there are some companies that have created scholarships kind of just as like a marketing ploy. They just want to kind of get leads for their business and sell to you eventually. They do give out scholarships, but it's kind of more like a sweepstakes versus like the actual heart and intention behind just helping students.
Yeah.
So it's kind of tricky. You have to like take the time to decipher what is really worth it. Is this a scholarship where they're going to be like reading my essay and valuing the work I put into it? Is it just like a drawing, kind of like a raffle, like maybe I'll win? And
Is
just
this
kind of
the publisher's clearinghouse? Is someone going to show up with a check at my door? I mean, we don't know.
right,
So we
right.
got to filter through those bad boys and make sure
Yes.
we're applying to legitimate scholarships.
Yeah, because if not, it could just be disappointing. Like if it's just like like yeah, sweepstakes scholarship, it's just disappointing because it's like, oh well, it was just luck of the draw versus like scholarships where there's actually people who are reading the essays and taking the time to get to know you and just seeing who you are as a person. So try to filter through. I usually recommend students use like at least 5 scholarship databases and get your different search results and then comb through and kind of check off like, okay, this scholarship seems like it's worth my time applying for. This one seems good. And then I also still recommend just like a good old fashioned Google search, which sounds so basic, but like if you type in targeted keywords, so let's say you are a female that wants to study STEM, typing in like female, comma, STEM, comma, scholarships, like a lot of times that can generate really good results. And then you can look for results that are specifically like from that scholarship program. So instead of just finding like other websites that list out scholarships, hopefully you can go directly to the scholarship provider's website and then find out, more about that program, which also helps you kind of cater your application to them. So while I recommend recycling essays, it's still important that you personalize each application and kind of get to know the heart behind why somebody's giving away that scholarship and what's important to them, so you can kind of customize your application to really stand out to that specific group.
Girl, you're throwing down the knowledge. Like, I hope that when people are listening to this, they're like taking notes on their phone or something, because I'm like, okay, 5 databases, and then we're going to go Courtney, comma, live, laugh, loving, comma, scholarship. And we're going to put that all together. But quite honestly, amazing tips. I'm going to make sure to list these out as well, guys. So then that way you can go back and refer to that, because this is so good. I have a follow-up question for you though, because let's say, okay, we found all of the scholarships, we're putting in our applications, but I'm sure that there's maybe pitfalls or like mistakes that people make. Are there some common mistakes that the listeners can avoid when they're actually inputting and applying for scholarships?
Yeah, one of the biggest things is just not being intentional. Like, people can get in such a hurry that they're just like slapping things together. They're not customizing applications. They have grammar errors. They're not looking at like the word count and making sure that they actually follow the instructions. Like, that's easy stuff that like can eliminate you pretty quickly. Like, that's stuff that like it just shows that you're not intentional and you're not really taking the time to care about this program. I've talked to several scholarship providers that are disappointed by the lack of quality in applicants, where they're just like, they had like 12 typos. Like, do they really care about my scholarship? Like, I'm wanting to give them $5,000 and they can't even use a spell check software. Like, that's so
Right.
disappointing. So it's like, at the very basic minimum, like, take the time to make sure that you followed all the instructions, that you proofread your essay, that there's not typos and grammar errors, even in like little line items where you're filling in like what activities are you involved in, like consistently use commas between the activities if that's needed. Like, if there's like a date section, like you're putting in the activity and then there's a section for the date, don't skip that. Like, make sure you didn't like miss something. Like, just do the basics of intentionality and make sure that all your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed. And then if you like want to take it to that next level, like take time to really develop your essays in a way that's heartfelt. Like, I think a lot of students see the essay section and they go, okay, I'm going to quickly type an essay out tonight. And it's just like, it's not really powerful. It's not really moving. And that's part of recycling, is it's like, when you recycle, like, make sure those 5 core essays are amazing and then recycle. Because if you're recycling something crappy to begin with, like, it's not really going to help that much in the long run. And I feel like that's why I had a lot of success in my scholarship applications. Even though I didn't apply to a ton of scholarships, I had really high odds because I like obsessed over those core essays. Like, I actually had like 7 people review each and every essay before I submitted it to one of the most competitive scholarships. I like took it to one person. I took it to like an English teacher and was like, hey, can you read this and give me some feedback? And they gave me the feedback. I took it back home. I revised it, made it stronger. Then I took it to another teacher and was like, hey, can you read this and tell me your thoughts? And then they had suggestions and I'd take it home and like revise it. And I just kept doing that until I like had this uber powerful essay that like impacted almost everyone who read it, because it's like, I didn't just go based on my own opinions or something I just slapped together really quick, but it's like, I really refined that essay to where it was like, ooh, okay, that's powerful. And then I took that essay and recycled it for other scholarships. But there was a lot of work on the front end, making sure that I really crafted a strong story and that it was something that was like impactful for the people who read the scholarship essay. Because that's the thing, is like, these are real people on the other end of the application process, right? Like, they're people who want to be moved by a good story. They're people who want to connect with you and they want to feel like, oh, I feel really good about this person and investing in them and investing this money. Like, I feel like they're going to make a difference in the world. And I'm excited because I feel like I know them after reading their application.
Well, I think we forget that a lot of times. It's like, I'm just putting this out into like the meta universe and it's not any real person involved. And they're real people that are reading through. And I love, it seems so basic and simple, but just paying attention to the details. Like, I know my ADHD brain, like, I'll look at something I got to fill out and I'm like, yeah, let me just go through like the bare minimum. Don't do that. It's like, if anything, section out, like save out your application and go back to it. Don't force through it just to check it off your list, because that's not going to help you. And I loved your tip of going through like trusted advisors, whether they're teachers or family members, someone at your church, and have them read through and give you feedback, because we have tunnel vision in general. Like, I know if I'm sending out a text message, I'm like, why didn't I read that 3 times. Why didn't I see that I misspelt like a basic word? And it's because we are seeing what we want to see, right? When we're the ones that created it. So I think that's huge, and having multiple people check it over, and you're getting, great perspective. So again, with the tips, it's like a mic drop right now. I feel like there's so much wisdom that you can share. What is it, if everybody could just remember one thing from this episode, what do you want them to take away from your message?
The biggest thing is, like, you can graduate debt-free. Like, it may take time and effort and strategy to think outside of the box, but you can do it. Like, take student loans off the table, pretend like they don't exist, and then go from there and say, okay, if student loans weren't available, if they weren't even an option, what would I do? Like, how could I get an education? Like, if you do that, then it's like you've taken away that vulnerability, that backup plan. It's kind of like, I feel like when you burn the bridge behind you, and it's like the only way I can go is forward, and like I've got to figure out a strategy, then you're more likely to be like, okay, and you see things that you maybe wouldn't see if you're like, oh, I have this safety plan of student loans, and if it doesn't work out, then you may not work as hard, you may not hustle as hard, you may not be willing to try different things, versus if like they were not an option but you knew you wanted to get an education, you're gonna find a way, you're gonna find a strategy. Even if it's hard, you'll figure it out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love that. It's like burn the bridge behind you, which is student loans. We're taking it off of the table. When there's a will, there's a way. We can press forward. We can be creative, innovative, think outside the box, go to the search engines, make sure that you do the Google search, and have people review your essays and pay attention to details. I think like those are such simple yet impactful tips that if our listeners take that away, I mean, it's going to make a world of difference. Guys, I want to read your essays. Send them to me. Okay. I'm one of your trusted advisors now. I'm not saying make sure you have backups, but like, I want to be a part of this. Okay. Do you have anything like upcoming, anything that you're going to be releasing soon? I want to make sure that the listeners know where to find you, and learn more about you.
Yeah, well, you can find me on Instagram at I am Kristina Ellis, which Kristina is with a K, and I'll post updates on what's coming up and what I'm putting out. One of the biggest things I'm working on right now is the Ramsey Show. I'm super excited. I've been here at Ramsey for about 8 months, and so it's been exciting getting to co-host with Dave, and I'm co-hosting for my first time with George Camel this Friday.
Oh gosh, George. How's it going with that guy?
He's awesome.
I love George. All of those guys. I mean, I love the Ramsey team, and I've had so many of you guys come on the show because the messaging is so strong. It's so impactful. And I love it. I'm like, every time I see an update from like George or John or Rich, I'm like, okay, these guys are having too much fun at work. I don't know if this is legal. So
it's great. I was doing an interview last week, and I was like, I kind of feel like it's like working at Disney World for adults. Like, it's really fun. Like
am I a Disney adult now? Is that like a thing? Oh, I love it. Yeah. But like, also like if you're a finance nerd, like you got to like twist it all together.
Yeah. If you like talking about money. Then,
yeah. Like people are like, you have a weird sick sense of humor. Okay. I am going to make sure to put Kristina's information in the show notes as well, guys, so you can find her and just click over and find her on Instagram. I love following her as well. You know where to find me, at Financially Free Journey, TikTok. I'm all up on that thing. I'm not chuggy. I promise. I'm doing the thing. And until next time, guys, thanks for joining today.